The smiling boy. Sarah had just moved into her new home on the quiet, tree-lined street, and everything seemed perfect. It was a charming neighborhood with friendly neighbors, and the air was filled with the soft scents of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. But every evening, around sunset, Sarah noticed a boy standing beneath a streetlight across the road. He was probably around 8 or 9, she guessed, and he always seemed to be there, watching her house with an innocent smile on his face. The first night, she noticed him as she went to close her living room curtains. She gave a small wave, thinking he was just a neighborhood kid. He didn't wave back but continued to smile, his gaze fixed intently on her. Sarah felt a slight chill but brushed it off as nerves from her recent move. He was just a kid after all. The next night, he was there again, same time, same spot, under the soft glow of the streetlight. This time, Sarah felt a prickling unease. The street was empty, and no one seemed to be watching him. She considered going outside to ask if he was lost or needed help, but something held her back, a strange, instinctual fear that she couldn't shake. His eyes had a certain emptiness, a stillness that felt unnatural, especially for a child. Several nights passed, and the boy continued his silent watch. Sarah told herself not to be paranoid. Kids are weird sometimes, she thought. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She asked a few neighbors about him, but they all seemed genuinely puzzled. No one could recall a boy matching his description in the neighborhood. "Are you sure he's not just visiting someone?" they asked. Sarah nodded, trying to convince herself she was overthinking it. One night, as she was getting ready for bed, she hesitated before closing the curtains. Her heart pounded as she looked across the street. He was there again, his pale face illuminated by the dim streetlight, smiling just as before. But this time he raised his hand and gave her a small wave, his gaze unbreaking. Sarah's hand froze midair, a chill sweeping over her as she realized she was afraid to wave back. She shut the curtains quickly, the sound of her heartbeats thudding in her ears. The following night, Sarah decided to go to bed early, hoping to avoid seeing him. But in the middle of the night, she was woken by a strange sensation. She felt a presence, something unsettling and familiar. Nervously, she walked to the window, her hands shaking as she opened the curtain just a crack. The boy was in her backyard, standing under the large oak tree, his small hand waving, his expression unchanged. The smile he wore seemed darker now, twisted, almost mocking. Panic gripped her. How had he gotten into her yard? She didn't waste time finding out. She dialed the police immediately. When they arrived, they searched the yard but found no sign of the boy. They looked at Sarah with a mix of concern and doubt, telling her there were no footprints in the soft soil under the tree. Embarrassed but relieved, she assured them she'd just imagined it, maybe from stress. But as she closed her door, her relief faded quickly. That smile lingered in her mind, etched into her memory. The next morning, unable to shake her curiosity, Sarah searched online for anything unusual about her house or neighborhood. What she found sent a chill down her spine. 50 years ago, a boy had been reported missing from the very street she lived on. His name was Thomas, and he was last seen, standing beneath a streetlight across from her house. Shivering, Sarah closed her laptop, but when she looked out the window again, she could swear she saw a shadow just fading from sight beneath the old streetlight, a shadow with a smile she would never forget. The smell from the vents. Nina loved her new apartment. It was small but cozy, right in the heart of the city, with bright walls and a charming view of the skyline. Everything about it felt right at first. But one evening, while unwinding after work, she noticed a faint, sour smell coming from her living room vent. She brushed it off, assuming it was just a passing odor, maybe something from one of the neighbors. The next day, the smell was stronger. Nina tried to ignore it, lighting a few candles to mask the scent. But by the evening, the air in her apartment had grown thick with the nauseating stench. It was hard to pinpoint. Sometimes it smelled like rotting food, other times more metallic, sharp, and unmistakably foul. She complained to the building manager, who promised to have maintenance take a look. Probably just some clogged pipes or something dead in the walls, he shrugged, though Nina found the comment unsettling. She couldn't shake the sense of something more sinister. Days passed, and the smell didn't go away. Maintenance couldn't find any source for it. Each time they checked, they assured her that the ducts were clear, and the building's plumbing had no issues. The maintenance crew eventually stopped responding to her calls, suggesting she was just getting used to city smells. But she wasn't imagining it. The odor continued to intensify, now pervading every corner of her apartment. It was so overwhelming that it seemed to cling to her skin and clothes. Each night she lay in bed, feeling suffocated by the foul air creeping through her vents. One night, exhausted and desperate, Nina tried to trace the scent herself. She pulled a chair up to the vent in her living room and carefully removed the cover. A rush of stale air hit her face, nearly making her gag. She leaned closer, using her phone flashlight to peer inside, hoping to spot whatever was causing the stench. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just dusty ductwork snaking off into darkness. But as she looked closer, she noticed something odd, the faint outline of what looked like fabric. It was barely visible, tangled and wedged in the narrow space. She couldn't quite reach it, but managed to hook it with a bent coat hanger, slowly pulling it out inch by inch. To her horror, a filthy, shredded piece of cloth emerged, smeared with dark stains and a stench that made her eyes water. It looked like an old, bloodied shirt. Her stomach churned, and she dropped it, stumbling back in revulsion. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ragged fabric and imagined what, or who, it might have belonged to. The next morning, she contacted the building manager again, but this time he seemed disturbed, promising to send someone immediately. Maintenance arrived an hour later and took her concerns seriously, finally searching the entire ventilation system. They checked the ducts from her unit, through neighboring apartments, and eventually found their way into the walls. After several hours, a manager and 2 maintenance workers knocked on her door, their faces pale. "Nina," the manager began, his voice trembling slightly. "I think we found the cause." He went on to explain that they had discovered something wedged inside the vent shafts that connected her apartment to the vacant one next door. She felt a cold sweat as he described it, a decomposed human body, twisted and contorted, wedged deep into the vent system. The body had been there for weeks, possibly months, decomposing in the walls between her apartment and the vacant one beside her. According to the building staff, the tenant who'd previously lived in the apartment next door was an older man who had recently been reported missing. He had been eccentric, keeping to himself and rarely seen by the other tenants. When they initially checked his apartment after he'd missed rent, they found it empty and assumed he'd left without notice. But in reality, he had been in the vents the whole time. Police were called to investigate, and soon they unraveled the unsettling story. The man had died in his unit, likely of natural causes, but instead of lying there in his apartment, someone, had dragged his body into the vent. The authorities found disturbing clues in the vacant apartment: scratch marks on the floor, signs of a struggle, and a trail of smears leading from his living room to the vents. Nina moved out immediately, horrified by what she had endured unknowingly for weeks. She left the apartment behind, along with the memory of that rotting stench that had clung to her skin. Sometimes, when she catches a whiff of something sour, her mind drifts back to those vents, and to what, or who, had taken up residence beside her. The handprint that won't go away. The Thompsons were thrilled to find their dream home, a spacious house on a quiet, suburban street, complete with a large yard and a finished basement. Moving day was a whirlwind of unpacking and settling in, and by the evening they felt exhausted but content. With everything finally in place, John and Margaret Thompson decided to explore the basement more thoroughly. It was the perfect space for a game room or mini gym, and they envisioned making it a family hangout spot. While exploring, their youngest daughter, Emma, noticed something unusual. Against one of the walls, low enough that even she had to crouch to see it, was a small, faded handprint. It looked like it had been pressed into the wall years ago, and the edges were smeared, almost as if someone had tried to wipe it away, but left a faint outline. The size of the handprint was unusual too, much smaller than a typical child's hand. Intrigued, Emma called her parents over. Margaret frowned as she looked at it. "That's strange. It almost looks like a child's hand, but so tiny." They wondered if the previous owners had children, perhaps a toddler who had somehow left the mark. John suggested they repaint the basement anyway, and the handprint would be easy enough to cover up. The next day, they bought a can of fresh, creamy white paint and covered the basement walls from top to bottom, leaving no trace of a small handprint. Proud of their work, they went about their evening, happy to have fully settled in. That night, however, Emma came running up from the basement, her face pale and her hands shaking. "It's back," she whispered. Confused, John and Margaret followed her downstairs. Sure enough, in the exact same spot, the tiny handprint had reappeared, smeared and faint, but undeniably there. John ran his fingers over it, trying to convince himself it was just the paint drying unevenly. "Maybe it's some kind of stain that just bleeds through," he muttered, attempting to reassure himself as much as his family. They painted over the spot once more, this time with an extra layer for good measure. But over the next week, the handprint kept returning. Every morning, the small, ghostly imprint was back in the same place. Each time it seemed a bit clearer, almost more deliberate. Margaret started to feel unnerved, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the basement held secrets they weren't meant to uncover. She began researching the house's history, hoping to find some answers. After days of digging, she discovered something disturbing. About 30 years ago, a couple had lived in their home with a young daughter who was born with a rare genetic disorder. According to the reports, she was very small for her age and was mostly confined to the basement because of her fragile health. One winter, she tragically passed away, her frail body unable to withstand a severe cold that swept through the area. The thought of the handprint possibly belonging to this child chilled Margaret to her core, but she kept the story to herself, not wanting to frighten her family. However, things escalated quickly. One night, they heard soft scratching sounds coming from the basement. They ignored it at first, thinking it might be pipes or a small animal. But the scratching grew louder, more frantic, almost as if something, or someone, was desperately trying to get out. When they went down to investigate, the small handprint had not only reappeared but had spread. Now there were several handprints on the wall, each smeared and slightly different in size, as if multiple small hands had pressed against the wall in desperation. The family decided to call a priest, who blessed the house and specifically prayed over the basement. The handprints vanished for a time, and the scratching ceased. They hoped that whatever spirit lingered there was finally at peace. A few weeks later, however, Emma came running up the stairs once again, this time in tears. "It's not just a handprint anymore," she sobbed. When they returned to the basement, they found a single, chilling phrase written on the wall in faint, small letters: "Let me out." The Thompsons moved out the following week, leaving the house, and whatever haunted its walls, far behind.